Israel is in a really tough position because they're fighting a war on all fronts. They're losing the propaganda war in Gaza. Can you actually get rid of Hamas? Because the more people you kill, the more people you radicalize.
Right. The thing that's happening just under the carpet that no one's talking about is all Israel's doing is radicalizing the next generation of Islamic fundamentalists. It's radicalizing the children who are watching their parents and uncles die at the hands of bombs, right? They're radicalizing the next generation of Hezbollah. They're radicalizing the next generation of Iraqi militia. They're radicalizing the next generation of Iranians who aren't going to trust that Israel is a democracy, that Israel is out for peace. And it's fascinating. You talk to many Israeli business owners and Israeli politicians, and they will talk about peace to your face all the time. But the actions that they carry out are very different. Mm-hmm. Well, what does that do to the observer? When the observer sees you spouting peace from your mouth and waging war with your hands, what do we always say? We always say actions speak louder than words. So the truth is, even if Israel does enjoy 5, 7, 12 years of relative safety and peace, then a whole new generation of radicalized Islamists will be of age to execute whatever they need to execute if they believe they need to execute anything at all. And how are they going to do that? Now you also lose the opportunity to know how it's going to be carried out. Think about the destruction of ISIS, right? ISIS was an organized, regionally kind of located threat. It was eradicated, and then it just transformed. It transformed into lone wolf people who were radicalized over the internet. And now you have lone wolf ISIS operators all over the world just showing up and stabbing some people, blowing some things up, shooting other people. They're still there. ISIS still exists because the ideology still exists. And you can't claim that you have victory over something when the ideology still persists.
But is it realistic to think that you could get rid of the ideology behind ISIS? I mean, it's been around for a long time, the idea of Islamism, right? Like, how do you deal with that anyway?
I mean, this is the same argument that we have with Nazism, and the same argument that we have with communism, and the same argument that we have with, even some of the really obscure religions that are out there, right? Is it even realistic to think that you're going to eradicate an ideology?
Yeah.
In many ways, Nazism has been reduced so significantly that it's not considered a transnational threat, right? There are, if it can be done with something that was once so organized that it waged a successful campaign across Europe, right? Then it can be done with anything. But how we go about fighting that battle, World War II was not a limited war. World War II was a total war.
Well, this is what I often think about, because I don't think anyone could see the scenes coming out of Gaza and not be absolutely horrified, especially if you're a parent and you're just watching, it's awful. But I just think, what would have happened if we had smartphones in 1944, 1945? I think the world would turn pretty quickly against the Allies if it was watching from the outside.
We saw it. Yeah, it happened in Vietnam too. Right. And that was just news journalists.
Right. So that's the thing. So I see exactly what you're saying. But on the other hand, I also think, well, maybe this is a terrible option, but the best Israel has, which is you secure your country for a while, and then you just have to deal with this 10 years from now again. And but that's really what has been happening in Israel since its very creation, basically, isn't it?
Right. This is why I say it was the right thing at the wrong time. Israel has no way of executing a land-based assault against Iran, right? If it wants what's known as an interstate war means one state invades the sovereignty of another state. If they really want regime change and they really want to eradicate the threat of the theocracy of Iran, they need to have a total war with Iran. That's what they need to do if they want to eradicate it quickly. If they want to kind of hope and dream that, just like we're hoping and dreaming that Putin is going to get uprooted from within by the oligarchs, if they want to hope and dream that the Ayatollah is going to somehow lose favor, they can. We can all kind of twiddle our thumbs and hope for the best in Iran and use sanctions and diplomatic methods that have been proven over time not to be as effective as we think they are. But if they really want that change, they would have to wage a land war. Well, they don't have the capacity to land. Like you said, they're fighting on three sides. Plus, there's other countries between them and Iran. You can't win a conflict with technology alone. You can't just bomb your way to success. That whole idea of bombing people back to the Stone Age, yes, you can do significant damage with air superiority. But as part of the damage that you do, you are fundamentally altering multiple generations of who people will see as victims and who people will see as the enemy in the years to come, right? And that's exactly what's happening in Iran right now.
But I'm just thinking, like, from a military perspective, if your choices are what Israel has, wouldn't like the best option be kind of what they're doing now, which is you defang your enemy and you just make sure that they can't attack you in the way that they could prior to that?
That is not what I think is the best.
Well, what is the best?
I believe Israel has the capability to wreak destruction on the cyber elements of how Iran carries out military communications and nuclear enrichment. If they were to target and destroy those databases, target and destroy that infrastructure with a Trojan horse, with sabotage, with human penetration, whatever it might be, that would do just as much damage as bombs, right? Because now you'd have to essentially replace entire mainframes. You could then attack the supply chain to make sure that they don't get those mainframes simultaneously to doing other covert action that might deplete the uranium supply. All of that without the population even knowing it was happening, right?
Then you don't have the collateral.
You don't have the collateral, you don't have the collateral damage. You don't run the risk of what we're seeing right now in Gaza, where nobody likes Hamas. Somehow the narrative has tied Hamas and Palestinians together. So now there are places where if you talk about Palestine, people think you're supporting Hamas, right? Like this nasty web of inaccuracy. The same kind of thing could happen in Iran right now. People could mistake what is theocracy versus what is Iranian, and then there could be support for Iran for being a victim because everybody wants to vote for the underdog. So there's a better way, a different way of going about it. Now, it would have been slower, or it could have been slower. It may not have ever needed the United States, but now what has happened is Netanyahu has gained favor, like we said, across the Middle East and with the West, and America looks strong, and Netanyahu and Trump are on the same page again. Like there were multiple political victories that aren't necessarily serving the long-term interest of Israel.
It's such a good point, because one of the problems, and we always talk about this on the show, is one of the flaws with democracy because of the election cycle is it breeds a short-term thinking amongst politicians, leaders, whatever else. And I do think there might be a time with, let's say 30 years down the line, when this younger generation, like the Gen Zs or like the millennials, they get into power. And as president of the US and other countries, they will no longer see Israel as an ally. They will see them as an aggressor. They will see them in a negative light. And the moment that happens, particularly if it's the United States, that really does put Israel in a very vulnerable position.
I would argue that that's already happening now. There are many Americans that don't see Israel as an ally. They don't see Israel as a peer. They don't see Israel as a democracy at all. They see Israel as this mutation of promises and actions that don't align, and they see it as abusive, and they see it as manipulative. And again, they don't see the distinction between Netanyahu's government, the Israeli government, and Judaism, right? There's three very different pillars here at work, but the average American, I would argue, doesn't really see those distinct nuances. And that's because Israel is just one of many things that the average American is focused on, right?
Absolutely. And I think that what's interesting in this as well is a role of Mossad, because when people talk about Mossad, like, there's obviously a lot of conspiracy, understandably so, when it comes to secret services, because they're secret, and when things are opaque, that's where you see conspiracy. But there seems to be more conspiracy around Mossad than possibly even the CIA or MI6.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And I think a big part of that is, well, twofold. One, of all the secret organizations that do public acts, Mossad is at the top of the list. What MI6 does, they don't make public. What CIA does, they don't make public. Other people make it public and CIA may comment on it, but they don't release footage of their incredible feats of courageousness or whatever else. Mossad does that because Mossad understands there's a psychological warfare element to being able to claim, hey, those pagers were us, and hey, here's footage of us launching drones inside Iran. Like, they understand that there's an information warfare value there. So Mossad is willing to do things publicly that other people won't take public credit for. And then on top of that, Mossad is very good about cultivating this idea that they are the best. But then something like October 7th happens. And everybody wonders, how could this organization that's supposed to be so great?
CIA believes that all people are born with a spy secret superpower. For some people, that means they can win deals. For others, they can spot liars. Some can even seduce lovers. I built a free 3-minute test to help reveal to you exactly what your secret hidden superpower is. All you have to do is click on the link in the description below, take the test, and start using your spy superpower to stay ahead of 99% of people.
Can drop the ball on that. That's kind of a big thing. And then if you recall, in the weeks after October 7th, that's when it started coming out. Like, there were actual reports and there were videos of drills that Hamas was running. Like, it wasn't new information. So how did this happen? And that makes Mossad look bad. It makes Shin Bet look bad. It makes IDF look bad. It makes all the major players in Israel look mildly incompetent at worst, or fully incompetent at worst, and bureaucratic and convoluted at best. But it calls into question what is their true capability, which then makes it that much more important to run these, again, another run of daring, high-risk scenarios like we saw with pagers and like we saw with drones.
I would actually argue that that's not the worst case scenario. What is the worst case scenario is what I saw, and people I actually kind of respected, going, you know what? They let it happen. Because there are so many conspiracies around Mossad, and they've built this kind of mystique about themselves. Like, they've got their own martial art. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I mean, what a publicity tool that is. Like, the CIA don't have a martial art, but you know, Mossad does. So if they're so good, if they're so powerful, if their tentacles are everywhere, how could they let October 7th happen? It must have been on purpose.
Fair. Yeah, that's fair. That is the true worst case scenario, is that they intentionally let harm come to their own people. I, as a national security professional, can't palate that. I can't conceptually even give that any sort of gravity, because it's so antithetical to what goes into committing your life to the service of national security. Letting your own people get hurt.
You can't imagine that.
I can imagine it for somebody else. Like, if you were, it has to happen, because there are Americans who go turncoat on their own country as well, right? It's so difficult. The cognitive dissonance for me in being able to say that systematically Mossad would have let something like that happen just to create a series of events in which they could orchestrate a large-scale attack on Hamas. It doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense to me, because if they wanted to launch a large-scale attack on Hamas, they just could have. At any time. They could have trumped up some sort of imminent threat, just like we saw in Iran, right? Hamas is imminently planning on attacking Israel.
Here are the videos of their routines, drills, etc.
Let's go and start a war.
No, it never made sense to me, not least because we see the security services in every country fail every now and again, and that's when big 9/11, you know, big terrorist attacks here in Britain. But Francis is right in that you do see a lot of people who kind of went full retard over that, you know, thinking that. So the question, I guess, is, based on what you're saying, my sense is you think this has actually been really bad for the security of the region, what the entire events of the last week.
So I think that the conclusion that I would make is that we have given Iran more power than it had before we ever started this. And that's the problem. 4 weeks ago, there was a stable relationship between the Khaliji states and Iran. There was a resounding success against the proxy players fighting Israel. There was decreasing attention on Israel and what's happening in Gaza. The narrative had switched to tariffs. The narrative had switched to, you know, other areas other than war, which meant that there was some reason to believe that there was going to be overall stability in the same kind of direction. But now, in the best interest of a few political points for Israel, political points for the United States, we have created a more unstable scenario that arguably gives Iran the ability to take actions that are justified. Whereas before, if they would have taken any actions against the Middle East, against Saudi Arabia, against UAE, against Israel, against the United States, it would have been first strike. It would have been preemptive. if they were to choose to shut the Hormuz Straits, if they would have chose to cut off supplies to the Khaliji states, if they would have chose to launch more rockets. It would have been them being aggressors. It would have been them stepping outside of line. Now, we have to wonder, what will they do and when will they do it? And when they do it, what are we all going to say in the world? Are we going to say, oh, this was unjustified? Or are we going to say this was in response to the bombing of these nuclear sites?
Well, let me present you an alternative argument, because obviously I wouldn't argue with you about your opinion about intelligence or all of that. But from a media perspective and political perspective, the way it looks to me is kind of the opposite of what you said in some ways, whereby Israel was losing more and more and more support from across the board because of what's happening in Gaza. And now they look like the guys who dealt with the threat of nuclear Iran. President Trump, as you say, gets a political victory. He's secured the ceasefire almost immediately, which is holding, as we sit here anyway. And so now you might argue Iran has been defanged somewhat. Maybe not in a nuclear way, but it doesn't have the air defense systems that it had. It's used a lot of its ballistic missiles and had others destroyed, right? Now other countries are talking about joining the Abraham Accords that weren't already on the list, right? So could this not be actually the beginning of everybody in the Middle East getting on board with the fact that Israel exists, Iran gets ostracized, and if they start doing other stuff that's on the nuclear end of things, they're going to get bombed again, basically?
I mean, it could be that. I agree. It could be that. I would argue that probability-wise, that's a good question. What is the most probable outcome? I don't know that we have enough information to really set probabilities yet. My concern isn't with the near-term benefits. I think that there are near-term benefits. I think you did a good job outlining those near-term benefits. I'm just saying I don't believe that the near-term benefits are going to outweigh the long-term risks. Because now there are phone calls and conversations happening between Iran and all of its closest partners, and the whole world now feels justified in preemptive strikes. So China is now feeling that much more confident in preemptively striking Taiwan. And Russia looks like they were doing the faddish thing when they preemptively struck Ukraine. Now there's a precedent that Western democracies, the leading country in the world, is willing to attack a sovereign nation across borders for no reason other than WMD, which we've done before.
Right. Iraq fucked this whole thing up.
Yeah.
You can just tell, right? Like, that's when the West really lost a lot of its moral credibility.
Correct.
Because the thing is, threats will exist that do need to be dealt with. But when you cry wolf a lot, then when the real thing happens, no one believes you.
Right. And the circumstances for this particular crying of wolf are rough. You have the DNI, Tulsi Gabbard, saying that they are not close to creating a weapon. And then you see the president tweeting the opposite, if I can still call it tweeting, I don't even know. And then you see the DNI changing her tone.
Well, she did say in her original testimony that they are enriching uranium to like 60%, right? And this is, maybe you can unpack this for us, because that's always been the area of contention for me, because I'm like, look, you say these people are rational and etc., but I'm like, well, they are, like, they're very wedded to their religious ideology. Let's put it as diplomatically as that. They keep saying they're going to destroy Israel. And they are enriching uranium way beyond what civilian purposes would need. And this is kind of part of, I remember reading a study about why fights between kids happen, because everyone perceives the punch they receive as being harder and the one that they throw as being not as hard, right? So I'm sure there's a lot of misperception happening. But if I'm sitting in the chair of Benjamin Netanyahu, I'm going, these guys hate us. They want our country destroyed. They've funded terrorists who are destroying our country as best they can, and they're enriching uranium way beyond what's needed for civilian purposes. I have an opportunity here to take that shit out. I'm going to do it. Do you see what I mean?
I see what you mean. So why include America? Because if they have the capability and they have other means, then why include America at all?
Well, my view externally was always like, this is Israel's war and they should handle it. And I imagine dropping the bunker busters was not the only way they could have got to those facilities, as you say, and you know way more about this than I do, right? But as you say, my sense, see, I think there's been this narrative that like Israel is like manipulating the American government. I'm pretty sure that's not how it works, because the American government is the most powerful force in the world, right? Like,
I think, yeah, that I wouldn't.
Donald Trump did this because Donald Trump wanted to do this.
Bingo.
Right? So
Bingo.
it's not him being manipulated by Benjamin Netanyahu.
Correct.
Right.
I think Netanyahu understood that when you put dog food in a bowl of a hungry dog, the dog's going to eat the dog food. So that's basically what he did. And he was like, hey, what we can do as Israel is eradicate their air defenses. And what we can do as Israel is share our incredible intelligence about what, where, when, why, and how. And we can give that to somebody who has the capability to do what we can't do, or has the capability to do something visually, a visual spectacle that we can't carry out. And then that still gives us options to do all the other cool shit that we're ready to do, right? I think he set up the window, he rolled out the red carpet, he timed it at a moment when he knew that the dog was hungry. And he was like, here you go. But he had a plan for in case Donald Trump said no.
I'd imagine so.
He had a plan for in case somebody in the United States was like, this is not our fight to have, right? But that's not how it played out. So instead, the way it played out, just like you said, works out politically is a big victory for everybody.